Alright, in this video we're going to make a database with HiD SQL, and this is a Windows only application, so if you're on a Mac you might use SQL Pro. You can even use PHP which is PHP based. Regardless, this is just a very simple free application to use. So here it is installed, and I created a new session for localhost, and my IP, you'll probably have the same IP if you're running WAMP server. My user is root and I don't have a password. So I'll go ahead and open that up. And we get our tables all listed on the left that belong to the localhost database. What we're going to do is create a new database. So I'll right click localhost, create new database. I'm going to call this Junior Dash to match our project name. And my encoding I want is just UTF-8 and general CI. Sometimes they have different collations. Where's the one I'm looking for? There's a Unicode one that offers more special characters like this one, but it's a little slower than just general. That's not really relevant for what we're doing. So I'll just press OK and refresh so that I get it right here. And I'm going to go ahead and right click this database and create new table. So the first thing we're going to want to do is create a user table, and the first column I want would be a user ID, and I'll just leave it at 10 unsigned so that it's always a positive number. There's no reason to have a negative number. It'll never be null. And for this guy, this is going to be an auto incremented value, and I can just right click this, create a new index, and this will be the primary key. Okay, and we'll add a couple more fields. So let's add login. This one will be a var character, and I'll just leave it at 50, and there should be no default value, and do not allow null. I'll go ahead and add one for the password. And this one will be 64 long, so we can fit a SHA-256 encryption in there. And of course we want their email. I'll just leave that at 64. And a lot of times I like to add a date added column. Sometimes I forget to use this. I always do a date time, and I like to do a date modified. Okay. So I'll save that table out, and now we have our user table. And don't worry if you don't get this all right. I'm going to provide the SQL schema that you can import into your database too. But this is if you decide to do it with me. So let's create another table, and we're going to call this one to do, and this will be for our to-do list. And it's going to follow the same layout as our other table. We'll create the primary key, exactly the same as the user one. I forgot to put ID there. Okay. Now you might say, why don't you just call this ID like this? And the reason is because if I have a to-do table and I join the user table, they both have a primary key of ID, so then I'll get a ambiguous error, and then I have to alias the column name. Now what that sounds like might sound like a bunch of mumbo jumbo, but believe me, it's easier to do this way. So this one for a to-do list, all we have is pretty much content, and I'll just make that 255 in length. Okay, we have our completed. Just make this guy a tiny int. I guess he's at the top. It'll just be one long, and by default we'll have 0. So they'll create a task, and it won't be completed until they check it off. And we'll just throw in the date added and a date time field, then the date modified, like that. Save it out, and then we're going to create a notes table, which is going to be almost the same thing. So I'll create a new table. It's a little redundant, but sometimes you do it this way. So we'll say note ID, Got to give the table a name, forgot that step. Unsigned, no nulls, auto increment, and make it a primary key. And with this one we'll have a title, which will be a var character, say of 100. And there should be no default value. And we'll say content, and this will be text. And then we'll have a date added and a date modified. And I'll save that out. Now all we have to do now is tie in notes and to-dos into the user table. So we have our user ID, which is a primary key, and users are going to be allowed to create notes and to-dos. You can see I made a mistake here. I called this no ID. This has to be called note basic, and save. So let me once over these tables, to-do ID and user ID. Okay, and we need to add a user field in here, so I'll call this one user ID and turn off this default value. I'll save that. Same thing here. And we want to make these foreign keys. So I'll go up to my foreign keys and I'll add one. In the column I want to make a foreign key is the user ID. The reference table will be the user table. And the foreign column will be the user ID right here. So I'll save that. Now on update, restrict, and on delete, what that means is if it doesn't find a match when you're trying to do an update with the user ID, for example, if I update a to-do item and this user ID doesn't exist, we'll get an error. And I find that the deletion is kind of annoying sometimes, so I like to put no action on that one. I'll go ahead and save. And for the note, we'll do the same. So the user ID, the reference table, and the foreign column, and the delete will be no action. Okay, exact same thing. Save, and just look through the tables once more. Okay, that looks good. And what I'm going to do is right click the table, export database as SQL, and make sure all your columns are ticked. And what I want to do is insert and the data. There's no data in here right now, but if there was, you would just have this data insert selected, and I'll just output this to the clipboard. So export, and up in my project I'm just going to right click and create a new empty file, and I'll just call it schema.sql and paste it in there. Okay, so what I can do is from now on, if I don't have my database, I could just select all this code and copy it, and if the database here is gone, I'll just go to my query tab and paste it in and run it. And sometimes it won't show up, so you gotta click and then hit F5 to refresh, and here it is right here. Okay, so now that we have our table, we're ready to move on to more database stuff.